I'm Dave Grove, and I'm the UPSLA Program Committee Chair. On behalf of the entire Splash Organizing Committee, it's a pleasure to welcome Vikram Adve to Splash to give today's keynote talk. I'm especially happy to be doing this at an UPSLA. I'm not sure if Vikram will remember this, but one of the first times I can recall us meeting in person, back when we used to be able to do that kind of thing, was at a conference. I'm pretty sure it was in early 2000 UPSLA. In any case, it was in the early days of both the JIKES RVM and LLVM projects. We spent several interesting hours in some hotel conference room in a deep technical discussion of the two projects and the respective goals and future plans. So it's really great to be welcoming Vikram to conference to give a talk to us. Vikram is currently the Donald B. Gilles Professor in the Department of Computer Science and a Professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He's an ACM Fellow, and jointly with Chris Latner and Evan Chang, the winner of the ACM Software System Award for their joint creation of LLVM. He's had a long and successful research career. Along with his research group and collaborators, Vikram has made significant contributions to the fields of compilers and programming languages, software security, system reliability, and parallel programming. So I'm really looking forward to hearing about his current work at the Center for Digital Agriculture. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Vikram. Welcome.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate it. And yeah, no, I remember our conversation. I remember the technical connections between JIKES RVM and LLVM is something that kept coming up. So that was very interesting. Thank you very much to Dave and to Ridesh for inviting me to give this keynote. I think UPSLA is one of our best conferences in the programming languages community. And so especially because of the breadth and depth of the work and the people. So I'm especially happy to be here to be giving this talk. What I'm hoping to be able to accomplish today is to convey some of the opportunities in the digital agriculture space for computer scientists to do novel, interesting research. And in particular, what kinds of research challenges exist. I will not by any means cover the whole space. There's a lot of different problems here, but I'll try to highlight some of them, and hopefully you will relate to a few of the things that I talk about. So as I'm sure you all can imagine, technology is not new in agriculture. In fact, the National Academy of Engineering, in their list of the top 20 engineering achievements of the 20th century, lists agricultural mechanization as one of the top 20. In fact, it ranks at number 7, even higher than computers. So that's clearly an indication that technology has had major impact on agriculture in the past. And in fact, in the course of the 1900s, for example, in the 50s to 70s, what's called the Green Revolution, built on a large number of deep technical innovations to greatly expand agricultural yields worldwide. And these technologies were able to support huge growth in the population in the 1900s. Unfortunately, this expansion also, so it's been said that this green revolution saved 1 billion people from starvation. A little bit of hype there perhaps, but it's really not that far from the truth. Unfortunately, the huge growth in yields came with very substantial environmental harms, including things like soil erosion and water depletion for freshwater sources, chemical pollution for waterways and land, and health impacts, greenhouse gases, extraordinary loss of biodiversity in many areas of the world. And this map at the bottom right here shows water pollution due to runoff of fertilizers in the Mississippi watershed, and all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And it's in fact one of the big problems faced in the US today is this kind of a nitrogen runoff. But the actually scary part in all this is that we're faced with a very similar problem all over again today. We expect populations to increase, the world population to increase by 2 to 2.5 billion people, additional people by the year 2050, another 30 years, which means we have to increase food production by 70% over what we produce today. And yet we have to do that without growing the available land under production, with fewer farm workers because farm populations are declining, And moreover, we have to do this under increasingly adverse climate conditions without causing all the environmental harms that were caused during the Green Revolution. That's an enormous challenge. In some sense, this is the fundamental challenge that world agriculture faces. So we can break that down. There are obviously hundreds of more specific aspects of the problem, but I'll just touch on a few of the highlights here. There are a number of challenges in different dimensions. Economic challenges, for example, extensive poverty and many rural communities who are really underserved by governments and infrastructure, education and transportation and other things. But also farmers face economic challenges like low commodity prices, high input costs for fertilizers and feed and seeds and labor. At the same time that they face significant weather risks because of varying climate, and that's increasing because of climate change, and trade risks. And all of these really impact the profitability that farmers have and can significantly raise the risk that they have to face every year. There's many other such challenges as well. I won't go through every one of them, but there are really important environmental challenges. I already mentioned nutrient runoff and soil deterioration. Herbicide resistance is another one, which I'll mention in a few minutes. And the impacts on rural health, livestock monitoring, greenhouse gases. Labor shortage, especially in the developed world, is become a major problem for certain crops, not all kinds of crops. Row crops have managed to avoid this by using large equipment to scale farm sizes, but in specialty crops where there's a lot of manual labor and also in livestock, labor shortages are quite acute. And there's related demographic challenges. The rural population is aging substantially. In fact, the average rural age of the rural population today on farms today in the US is around 58 or 59 years, which is quite old if you think about it, because this is a working population to a large extent. And it's caused by urban migration and poor education and employment opportunities. And these are not independent problems. These are all highly interlinked problems, not surprisingly. So let me just give you a little bit more detail on three of these problems just to illustrate the kinds of issues that come up, because these are also challenges where technology can have a significant role. In fact, can have a significant role in many of these problems. I'm just going to use three of them to illustrate the nature of the kinds of problems that come up. Um, so first, nutrient runoff. Um, Again, this is the same map I showed earlier, the watershed of the Mississippi River. The problem that occurs is that um, nitrogen and phosphorus, which are highly water soluble, run off from the fields. In fact, they say that 40% of nitrogen nitrate fertilizers that are applied to fields during the growing season escape out into the waterways. And the problem is that these fertilizers increase algae blooms in the waterways, which block up, which use up oxygen and block sunlight, and that leads to extensive dead zones in both rivers and oceans. And in fact, the NOAA has said the Gulf's recurring, so this is the quote at the bottom of the slide here, the Gulf's recurring summer hypoxic zone continues to put important habitats and valuable fisheries at risk. So in Louisiana and Texas, Mississippi, for example, there are serious impacts in fisheries because of fish dying out. And there are also impacts on human health, like blue baby syndrome and global warming because of nitrogen oxide, which is the third most potent greenhouse gas. All of this is um, substantially caused by fertilizer usage in the Midwest. And in fact, the problem is so important that the National Academy of Engineering included this in the list of 14 grand challenges. They call it engineering the nitrogen cycle. And in particular, the challenge here is to bring engineering solutions to solving the problems of the nitrogen cycle. And these problems span many different aspects of engineering, but computer science is one of them as well. So that was one challenge that I wanted to talk about, and I'll say more about the kinds of solutions that or role that computer science can play in a moment. But let me just talk about two more challenges here. The second one is herbicide tolerant weeds. So the way that farmers deal with weeds is to spray them with chemicals like Roundup, which many of you may be familiar with. The chemical in that is glyphosate. Unfortunately, very strong chemicals also kill the plants, and in fact, the glyphosate only became successful when the maker of glyphosate developed an herbicide tolerant, a genetically modified variety of soybean um, that was resistant to the weed killer so that it could be sprayed and not just kill the plant along with the weed. And that graph on the left there shows the adoption of herbicide tolerant seeds in a variety of industries today. And you can see that these herbicide tolerant seeds have been used extensively over the last couple of decades. Um, Unfortunately, weeds adapt, they evolve and grow resistant to these herbicides as well. And today there are 165 different weed varieties, species, that are resistant to almost all modern herbicides. And that problem has become so acute that weed specialists say that within the next 5 to 10 years, there are going to be no effective herbicides farmers can use, chemical herbicides. So this has become a huge problem for farmers throughout the country. In fact, throughout the world, you can see that the graph spans the whole world. A third major problem is labor shortages, as I mentioned earlier. There's been a long-standing decline in rural populations, um, and yet and that's shown by the graph in the middle of the slide on the right there. Um, but at the same time, there's also a decline in migrant labor that has been used extensively, for example, in specialty crops. In fact, the US put in an immigration program called H2A, which are special temporary visas for immigrant labor in agriculture. And 82% of them work on specialty crops, but their populations are declining very strong, very sharply. And so these labor shortages are among the biggest challenges that are faced today in specialty crops and livestock. And the USDA believes this is one of the most serious problems facing US agriculture today. So, how can computer science uh, attack these problems? And in particular, what kinds of research issues will come up as we try to attack these problems? That's what I'd like to try and address on the next few slides. And I'm going to break or group these potential directions into broad areas of research within the computing and computer engineering communities. So the first one here is wireless sensor networks and IoT. Sensors are becoming widespread in agriculture for areas like weather monitoring, soil monitoring, livestock monitoring, and then for used for things like irrigation control to minimize water usage in low water areas like the Central Valley in California, and also for measuring yield during harvest on large equipment. And I have highlighted in this orangish color the areas that really need very extensive research before these capabilities can become widespread. Some of the others are starting to be used in agriculture today, the ones in black, but the ones in orange need quite a bit more research. And I'll actually talk about both soil monitoring and livestock monitoring a little bit more. A second area is broadly data science, machine learning, and cloud computing. The use of data for what's called precision agriculture or variable rate application of inputs on farms has become increasingly popular. There are companies that provide data-driven services to allow farmers to be more precise in their use of fertilizer and pesticides and herbicides so that they vary the application of this in different parts of even a single field, not just across different fields. And this can significantly optimize the use of expensive fertilizers, for example. Also, these kinds of technologies, data science technologies, for example, can be used to do things like yield prediction from a combination of remote sensing from satellites, planes, drones, and in situ sensing in the fields. They can also be used for a number of other important problems, like, for example, monitoring and predicting soil nutrients, which can be used to measure the nutrient runoff problem I talked about a couple of slides back. They can be used for doing things like predicting plant outcomes. So what are called phenotypes, all of the properties of an organism, the size, the shape, the weight, the color, and many other aspects of an organism is called the phenotype. In order to develop better performing seed varieties, um, seed companies do extensive experiments that essentially try different seed varieties under different environmental conditions and different management policies like the use of fertilizer and so on. And this problem is generally called the G by E by M problem to predict the phenotype. It's sort of one of the fundamental problems in biology. And that kind of prediction could be done using machine learning techniques, but it's really open research problem to be able to do that well. And then federated learning for data privacy is another issue that is very important because farmers care a lot about the privacy of their data. A third broad area is computer vision and edge computing. So computer vision has many important potential applications in farming. It's only begun to be used in very limited ways. There are a few startups that are doing this today, but it's not something yet um, that has become widespread because some significant research is still needed to make that work effectively. But areas where this can be really important are areas like high throughput phenotyping for breeding seed varieties, detecting diseases in crops, or monitoring livestock 24/7 in a non-invasive way to look for early indicators of stress and disease, and so on. And then when you add robotics to the mix of that, along with vision and edge computing or other sensors, you can do a number of really important tasks that are difficult to do today. And here again, a lot of research is really needed before it can become widespread. But these are areas where the potential is very high. And again, there's lots of startup companies that are exploring these, but it's a wide open field. So I mentioned precision variable rate fertilizer application. That can be made more effective by using robots to do the applications in a much more precise way. But also high throughput phenotyping for breeding, I already mentioned, detecting disease, which can become easier if you have robots to carry cameras around in a field, or mechanical weeding, which is a really important problem to avoid the herbicide resistance issue I mentioned earlier, because with mechanical weeding, you're no longer using chemicals. And so you don't have the issue of plants having become or at least evolving resistance to specific chemicals and the action pathways that chemicals use to kill weeds. Also, more efficient planting of cover crops, which can reduce nitrogen runoff and reduce soil erosion and improve in general soil quality as well. And then a major area is autonomous harvesting of specialty crops. This is not something that has had enough success so far, but it's a promising direction to address the labor shortage for specialty crops. And then something probably a little closer to this community is the area of programming languages, software engineering, security, and privacy. There are important optimization problems, for example, broadly in the area of heterogeneous edge computing, which is my own area of research. And I'll say more about that as one of the projects that I'll discuss a little bit later. Um, because many different technologies in agriculture require some degree of edge computing, and that's actually increasing dramatically as the new technologies are explored, like computer vision and robotics. Another area that I think is really important and has just not received enough attention is making programming easier. So many of the problems that I talked about earlier, including problems that scientists face, are require extensive amounts of programming by scientists. But the scientists doing this are things like crop scientists, animal scientists, plant biologists, and so on. For example, people who are breeding seeds, they're really not computer science experts. They're not even something like a domain-specific language like I don't know, Cafe or TensorFlow or others, um, and Python for that matter, are quite technical languages. They are quite a bit below the high-level domain knowledge that the scientists themselves have. So I think there's a real opportunity here to make programming much easier for people who are really not expert and should not need to be experts in the underlying computing technologies. sixth broad category of problems is in the area of human interaction with these technologies through natural language processing, information retrieval, human-computer interaction. In particular, many autonomous systems like the robots, teams of robots, or autonomous monitoring of livestock really are meant to be semi-autonomous in the sense that they are um, meant to be guided by teams of farm managers who are interacting with the technologies to run their operations, whatever the operation happens to be. And so human in the loop autonomy is really critical in this area. For example, machine learning models or data prediction techniques or other things need to be as interpretable as possible so they make sense to farmers, because farmers are just not going to use them unless they understand why models make certain predictions or give certain recommendations. And then natural language communication through text and speech can greatly improve the usability of these technologies. Data visualization similarly can make it much easier to understand what's going on in a farming operation. And very interestingly, there's a whole area of information retrieval from scientific text corpuses, which has a lot of value for scientific research. And that's another area where I think there's a lot of potential. So what I try to do in the last three slides is to show, is to, at a very, very high level, really without any technical details as such, give you a flavor for the many different dimensions of computer science research that could be applicable to digital agriculture. Um, in the uh, in a new institute called AI Farms, which is one of the 7 institutes that was recently funded as part of the National AI Institutes program, we are exploring one particular dimension of this, which is artificial intelligence capabilities, and in particular, how AI can play a role in addressing many of these major challenges. And AI Farms is led by, I'm the project director, it's led by the Center for Digital Agriculture at Illinois, and includes people from 7 different institutions. It's funded by the USDA and the Center for Digital Ag. We are working in 6 broad thrusts that are enabled by AI. I won't go through the individual thrusts here. I'll just say a few words about them right now, and then I'll say more about other projects, one of which is part of AI Farms, and the other 2 are not. In fact, they're not part of my team at all, or any of our teams. Um, but the 6 thrusts, starting from the left, are autonomous farming for row crops, and in particular, how robotics and drones and edge computing and related technologies can be used to make farming much more sustainable by expanding the effectiveness of the human farming team on in crop operations, and also reduce labor requirements in specialty crops. And then the second one at the top is labor optimization for livestock. This is the area where we want to use non-invasive monitoring techniques like computer vision and other non-invasive sensors combined with machine learning and behavioral prediction capabilities to provide autonomous feedback to farm managers as early as possible when signs of stress or health problems are detected among animals. For example, one of the most common indicators of either poor health or heat stress or many other problems is just lack of appetite. So just noticing that an animal is not eating or eating very little is a strong indicator that that there's a problem that may not be detected. But it's, if you ever see a farm with um, 5,000 dairy cows or 12,000 um, sows, pigs that are bred to give birth to new pigs, there's just no way for humans to monitor each one of them. In fact, we visited a pig farm with 12,000 sows. They have 7 people working there. There's just no way that you're going to get individual attention for those animals. And so having this kind of autonomous monitoring can be enormously helpful to the farmers. The third area, which is to the right, is environmental resilience. This actually involves 2 kinds of issues. One is developing plant varieties that are resilient to climate change. So, for example, resilient to increased ozone levels, increased drought, greater variability in rainfall and rain-related events. and also increased carbon dioxide, but then also how we can minimize the impact on the environment from these kinds of seeds, because the underlying technologies are really the same. They're the technologies used to breed more efficient, more resilient seeds and plants. And so there's a lot of work there on high throughput phenotyping, predicting phenotype using machine learning, computer vision for all of these problems and others. And finally, the one on the bottom, which is soil health for agriculture, where we are looking at ways to monitor and to predict the flows of nutrients in the soil, and in by using that to enable better uh, uh, incentives and monitoring for the use of nutrients in plants and crops. And then the final two thrusts are cross-cutting thrusts. The one on the bottom left is about technology adoption and public policy. This is very much a research thrust by the ag and consumer economics field to look at what kinds of technologies will be adopted in practice using economic modeling, farmer surveys, and others. And then shaping public policy and policy incentives to enable adoption of techniques that are, for example, more environmentally benign. And then, of course, a very strong and a broad educational outreach thrust. And all of these are enabled or supported by a number of foundational AI research goals in AI farms. In fact, we've identified in the course of developing the plans for the center, we identified 6 um, key AI problems that are foundational in the sense that they are applicable to many different domains, not just agriculture, but almost any domain where AI could play an important role, which today people believe is almost everything. But very quickly, and I won't spend too much time on this, the 6 problems are what so the first one is that it's extremely difficult, expensive, and time consuming to be able to develop labeled data to guide large effective machine learning problems. They're sometimes called the small data problem. And in particular, the problem that you only have very small, limited labeled data sets, even though you may have enormous, extensive unlabeled data. And so this is a research area, not just in agriculture, but in any field where it's difficult to gather labeled data, which is quite common. The second is heterogeneous information fusion, that information sources in agriculture come from many different kinds of sensors across widely varying time scales and spatial scales. And being able to develop data analysis or data mining techniques that can correlate data across all these different sources is a wide open research problem. The third one is that um, machine learning uh, techniques like neural networks or many other statistical techniques today are often black box techniques. They don't take domain knowledge into account. But in fact, in an area like agriculture and many other scientific disciplines, there's very deep scientific knowledge about the underlying processes. So, for example, how very detailed knowledge, for example, about plant behavior or animal behavior or many others, and soil behavior and so on. If we can incorporate that domain knowledge, the scientific knowledge, into machine learning models, we could get both better accuracy from these models, but also more interpretable results. The fourth area here is federated learning at the edge. So edge computing is critical because there are a number of areas like, for example, robotics and computer vision and others, where you really do need to be able to make low latency decisions in the field, or it's just very difficult to transfer all the data back to the cloud because of connectivity limitations. And so that's the reason for having edge learning capabilities. But federated learning is also important because of data privacy. And this, we sort of folded these things together, but both of these are important in this domain. The fifth one is control, in particular machine learning techniques to be able to improve control of autonomous systems like robots and drones. This is a um, growing area within the robotics community, for example, using techniques like reinforcement learning to be able to adapt in the field to unexpected conditions so that you are not stuck with only responding to situations that you were trained, that the machines were trained to deal with before manufacturing, before design. And the sixth one is is human in the loop intelligence, which I discussed quite a bit earlier. But this is again a wide open research area in the AI community. So these are at a very high level some of the research directions that we're exploring in the AI Farms Institute. What I'd like to do next is just to make all of this a little bit more concrete um, by talking about three specific research projects. The first one is from my group. It's on compilers and optimization for edge computing, and in particular, I'd like to talk about how the role that can play in agriculture. The second one is from University of California at Santa Barbara. So I have had no involvement in this. In fact, it predates any of my work in digital ag for sure, called the UCSB SmartFarm, where they're exploring sensor networks, cloud computing, and machine learning techniques for precision agriculture. And the third is one from Microsoft Research called FarmBeats, led by Ranveer Chandra. And the FarmBeats project it's grown into a very broad effort, including a couple of commercial products um, in the areas of wireless networking and also in sensing and IoT, feeding into cloud computing on Azure. So let me start with the first one, the compilers and optimizations for edge computing. Um, I probably don't have to belabor the point in this community that heterogeneous systems and heterogeneous parallelism and specialization are powering many different kinds of new devices today, including cell phones and drones and AR, VR headsets and autonomous vehicles and many other smart speakers of all and smart devices of all kinds, because they enable far higher levels of energy efficiency and performance. The challenge they raise is programmability. So heterogeneous parallel systems have very serious diffi- uh, difficult programming challenges. And in my group, we have had a project called HPVM, Heterogeneous Parallel Virtual Machine, which is an extension of the LLVM compiler infrastructure to add a explicit representation of parallelism that's suitable for a wide range of different heterogeneous systems. And HPVM uses a common IR that can be used to target many different kinds of devices, including CPUs, GPUs, FPGAs, and domain-specific accelerators. And that's a common IR for all of these different hardware targets through device-specific translators that target that IR to each of these different devices. And today we support a somewhat primitive C++ programming interface with explicit calls to describe HPVM, the HPVM representation or data flow graph representation, or Keras, which is a domain-specific language for neural networks. But we're developing other languages as well, including a much better parallel C++ dialect, and also support for the Onyx framework for neural networks. And our expectation is that we will be supporting a variety of other DSLs as well on top of this common infrastructure. The broad goal here is to enable better much easier programmability for heterogeneous parallel systems, including the ability to develop applications that combine multiple different languages for different components while targeting the whole application into a range of different hardware. And the HPVM IR, like LLVM, in fact, can be used for multiple purposes. It can actually be used to ship code, and that's important in heterogeneous systems because portability is a major challenge if you don't have a good way to deal with this. So HPVM can provide a portable object code representation similar to how JVM bytecode can be used to ship Java programs. It also provides an IR for compiler techniques. In fact, it's a highly retargetable IR, as this diagram is trying to show. The third thing it provides is an explicit graph representation for runtime scheduling, which can allow different computational tasks within a parallel program to be mapped to different hardware devices within a single heterogeneous system, and even to move computations tasks dynamically from device to device. So that's the broad HPVM project. We have quite a few different results showing the effectiveness of the code generation capabilities and the fact that the HPVM is highly retargetable, and why it's a good abstraction for the different kinds of parallelism. In more recent work, we have been applying HPVM for edge computing applications, where many of which have the ability to tolerate small reductions in accuracy or quality, more generically quality. In particular, what I mean to say is that there are a large number of edge applications, like in robots or in drones or AR/VR headsets or autonomous vehicles or many others, where exact results are not uh, expected. They're not even possible in many cases. And in fact, small reductions in accuracy are um, will not impact the application level result. And we have actually been we have shown that explicitly recently for robots in the ag domain, and are doing that in other domains as well. But so, for example, some of the examples I've shown here are using computer vision models for navigating between rows of corn in a cornfield, um, or harvesting fruits and berries in a robot for specialty crops, or estimating the size of corn ear and counting the number of corn ears in a field, which is what's needed for rapid phenotyping, or more generally environmental sensing. And on the right there, um, you can see a short video clip of a live camera. This is a camera that is monitoring a swine operation on the University of Illinois campus, the swine research facility. And these pigs are being monitored 24/7. And what you're seeing there is a video of just one of the pens in that facility. And this monitoring is what the input is for identifying health issues, behavior prediction, and so on for livestock. Um, this is a short video clip showing the kinds of robot that we are working on. We're developing an autonomous farm on the Illinois campus. So here the robot's using a camera to measure plant width. Here you might see the small orange bounding boxes to measure corneal size. Here the same robot is being used to weed for mechanical weeding. And the point is that in all of those tasks, exact accuracy of the computer vision models is not important. So in recent work, we have been developing compiler and runtime techniques to be able to select approximation choices that can be used to improve performance and reduce energy requirements for models, including machine learning and image processing. We've developed a system called ApproxTuner, which takes as input a high-level specification of what accuracy loss or quality loss in general might be acceptable for a particular application. So for a neural network, which is illustrated here, perhaps an application might say I can tolerate a reduction of 1 percentage point in inference accuracy to go from 95% to 94%, let's say, or 78% to 77%, or whatever it is. And that small reduction in accuracy loss can allow very substantial improvements in energy and performance. In fact, up to 2x in some cases. And ApproxTuner automatically then selects among a number of approximation choices for the application domain. These approximation choices are both domain-specific ones, so algorithmic approximations like in a neural network using a perforated convolution or using feature sampling in convolutional layers, but also possibly generic ones like replacing 32-bit floating point with 16-bit floating point, or even quantization with integer values, or using an analog accelerator that might have other approximation features. And the the point here that we're trying to show on the right side of the slide is that different parts of the application may need to use different approximation choices among some available set that ApproxTuner is aware of. And the main challenge that ApproxTuner solves is to choose which approximation to use for each of the parts of the application and pick the correct knob settings, because each one of these choices comes with a range of different parameter values to optimize performance. And in fact, in practice, for a neural network like ResNet 50, there's a search space of 10 to the power of 74 different possible combinations of approximations and parameter settings. So ApproxTuner uses an autotuner to explore the space fairly efficiently in order to find a good choice of approximations that, most importantly, satisfies the user specification of accuracy loss. So we guarantee statistically that we're not going to violate that specification. And within that constraint, we want to maximize performance and energy efficiency. So this is the ApproxTuner project, and we've done this work mostly in the context of generic algorithms like neural networks and image processing pipelines. But more recently, we've been applying this to the small mobile robots that I was showing you earlier. So these are two of my graduate students out on the Illinois Autonomous Farm doing experiments with the robot to look at a particular question, which is, so these robots were developed by a startup company at Illinois. And what we were looking at is, can these approximation techniques be used to reduce the compute requirements by enough of a ratio, so a large enough reduction that we can significantly reduce the cost of the hardware on these robots. And the models we were experimenting with are, so this was developed by another research group. They developed a navigation system for this robot using computer vision. They use a pair of neural networks for distance estimation, one for distance estimation and one for predicting the heading of the robot from the camera. And they're using the same network for both, I should say. They basically is running two copies of the same network architecture that have been trained for these two tasks. And in this experiment, which I'm going to show results for in the next couple of slides, what these students were doing is measuring in the course of a run of about 360 meters, which is the length of a row of corn, um, how many crashes, how many times the robot ran off the middle of the row and hit the plants on the side and then got blocked. So a human intervention was required to restart the navigation. And we are measuring trade-offs with frame rates, and so we're using a Jetson Nano just to uh, do a high performance computation and then introduce artificial slowdowns for the frame rate measurements. But we're using a Raspberry Pi as the primary compute hardware for running the approximate neural networks. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. So first, in this experiment, we're using only one kind of approximation, which is pruning. Pruning is a popular technique now in the neural network community to reduce the size and compute requirements for neural networks so they can be run on smaller systems. And the a prune network is developed, sort of you prune a little bit by removing some of the connections in the network, then you retrain the network and then remove some more connections and so on. So it's an iterative process to design a pruned network, starting with the fully trained non-pruned network. And at each pruning step, you reduce the size of the network, but you might also increase the loss, which is why the retraining is required. And at each step, you're reducing about 20% of the size of the network, at least in the early steps, but that starts to slow down. And so you can see in the chart on the left there, the reduction in the total number of flops required for ResNet 18 as you increase the number of pruning steps, the iterative pruning um, design process for this network. And by the time you get to 20 steps of the pruning, you have reduced the number of flops by almost a factor of 80. So remember, that's not 80%, that's not 5x, that's 80x reduction in the total amount of flops. In other words, you're down by 98% in terms of compute requirements. So this is a dramatic reduction in size and compute requirements for the network as you increase the amount of pruning. That's the approximation we were experimenting with. And the first graph here, the next one, um, again, remember, our goal here is to investigate whether approximations can reduce the hardware requirements, the compute requirements. So this first graph here shows on the y-axis the number of crashes in one run of 360 meters. The x-axis shows the frame rate at which we're doing the computing. And we change the frame rate essentially by introducing artificial delays in processing frames coming off the camera, using ResNet 18 as the neural for both the neural networks for distance estimation and also heading prediction. And we're doing this at 1 meter per second. So the robot is going at a fixed speed of 1 meter per second. And what you can see is that at a frame rate of 2 frames per second, the the processing of the frames is just too slow to avoid crashes. So the response, the adjustments to the direction are just too slow, and the robot crashes 12 times at a frame rate of 2 frames per second. But that goes down very quickly, and by the time you get to 4 frames per second, you hit about 0 crashes. And each data point here, by the way, is an average of quite a few runs. I don't remember exactly how many. I think it was either 5 runs or 8 runs. I can't remember the exact number of repetitions for each data point here. But so the main message from this graph is that increasing the frame rate, which means improving the compute time, can eliminate crashes. And in fact, is important to eliminate crashes. And then the second graph here now shows how we can take advantage of that. So by using pruning. So the first graph on the left did not do any pruning. That was the full ResNet 18 network. Um, on the graph on the right, we are starting with, we are looking at different levels of pruning on the x-axis. And the y-axis here again shows the number of recorded crashes. Also, the y-axis on the right shows the frame rate that you achieve with the different levels of pruning. So, in particular, if you have no pruning, which is x equals 0 here, you can see that the frame rate is just under 1 frame per second. And at that rate, we're getting almost 10 crashes on average. That's the orange line. I'm sorry, no, I'm sorry. I'm mixing up the lines. The orange line is showing that we're getting almost 45 crashes at if there's no pruning on this network. But that drops as we increase the amount of pruning because the frame rate goes up. So the frame rate goes, that's the dark orange line, that increases from almost 10, um, no, sorry, from almost 1 frame per second all the way up to uh, just below, just above 5 frames per second. It's about 5.5 actually frames per second. And at 5.5 frames per second, for this speed, and this graph is showing a speed of 1.2 meters per second. It's slightly different from the first one. But the horizontal red line shows the minimal frame rate we need to avoid crashes completely, to have 0 crashes. And we have to get to a level, once we get to a pruning level of 8, we can avoid crashes completely. So basically what this is saying is that we can significantly reduce the compute requirements to avoid crashes, even for this network. And the bottom line that, so we have a lot more data that we measured, the students measured in their experiments, but what the bottom line is they showed that they can replace the Intel processor, i7 processor, an Intel NUC that is being used on the robots today in the commercial version with a $60 Raspberry Pi for this vision-based navigation and still avoid, basically get 0 crashes in this, in navigating through the rows of corn with very high probability. And that's a dramatic reduction in the cost of the robot. And that's just one task. That's really just the navigation part of what the robot needs to do. But the actual tasks themselves are things that we are still going to be exploring next. For example, on the left, we have estimating um, uh, both the size and number of corn ears for rapid phenotyping. And this has problems like image segmentation, object classification, depth estimation, size estimation. Then in the middle, we have harvesting fruits and berries using an autonomous robot, which requires, again, segmentation and classification, but also much more complex, expensive computations like volumetric reconstruction of the plants and of the fruit and the leaves, and real-time planning and control, and manipulating multiple arms so that one arm can move leaves out of the way to reach fruits or berries that are buried deeper inside the plant. And then on the third graph on the right here, it's not a graph so much as it's a simulation of a team of robots. Those are the little squares in blue. They are navigating through a field, and this is a robot swarm, because when you have large fields of hundreds of acres, you really need teams of many of these robots, which is it's far cheaper than the big equipment people use today. But a team of robots can collectively, in a coordinated fashion, go through the field performing tasks like mechanical weeding, for example, or spraying, or identifying disease. And this raises a number of other compute requirements like um, edge machine learning in a distributed fashion for um, coordinating the navigation decisions across the field, and coordinated navigation using that machine learning information, and also, for example, weed recognition using neural networks. These are some of the tasks that we're starting to look at along with other ag and robotics researchers in the Center for Digital Ag and in the AI Farms project. So that's all I had to say about our own work in uh, one aspect of our work, which is using compilers and optimization for edge computing. Let me say a little bit about the UCSB SmartFarms project here. Um, so the SmartFarm project was started by a husband and wife team, Chandra Krins and Rich Wolski, at UCSB in 2014. And honestly, they have done so many interesting um, systems research um, questions in the smart farm effort that I was really very impressed. Um, they have been working on this starting with an NSF grant in 2014. Their broad goal is to look at a variety of research opportunities spanning multiple disciplines in cloud computing, data analytics, programming systems, to be able to enable farmers, including smallholder farmers, to use precision management tools for agriculture and automation tools. And at a very high level, one of the main novel aspects of their work is that they've developed systems techniques to, what they, as they put it, bring the cloud to the data instead of vice versa. Um, they have been doing edge computing um, before this term became popular, and in particular developed very efficient techniques, for example, for doing things like lambdas, that is 2 orders of magnitude more efficient than either Amazon AWS or Azure for distributed computing with distributed computing in general, and they've used it for farm data. And they use this cloud computing capability on the farm to do a variety of on-farm tasks like data aggregation, analysis, and so on. And I'll just mention a couple of examples of projects that they have explored using these technologies and others. So one project here was to optimize the use of water usage for almond plants, almond trees, so they developed solar powered sensor boards and on-farm analytics, and along with the use of soil and moisture temperatures and sensors to be able to control irrigation sources. And they found a number of interesting um, results from this work, including that information people did not expect, that moisture levels really vary dramatically across fields, and then 1-foot measurements provide much more reliable measurements than 2-foot depth to 3-foot depths. Um, and not surprisingly, that state-of-the-art but low-cost sensor devices are quite fragile. They're really not designed to be sufficiently robust to environmental conditions or to be usable. Um, and so developing more robust systems is extremely important in this area. A second example is using sensors along with machine learning models to be able to predict what they call nanoclimates. These are climate conditions in very small parts of a field, because the specific problem faced here is that fruit farms in the California Central Valley face problems with frost. And to avoid frost, the farmers use large wind machines to avoid freezing. But these wind machines are both expensive and noisy, and they need much more precise control. And so they're trying to use much more precise sensing to be able to use these wind machines more efficiently. But in order to predict these nanoclimates across large fields, they couldn't really put sensors in every single location. So what they did was to put a few highly accurate but expensive sensors in a few points in the field, and then combine that with, interestingly, so the details are not on the slide, but I know it because I looked at their paper. They use the temperature sensors within processors, which are built into processors today, to figure out what temperatures processors are reaching, modulated by the actual compute utilization for the processor as a cheap, low-cost sensor. So basically, there's no new sensor there. There's already the existing compute hardware, which can be used to measure the climate condition around the processor. And then that's a low-cost sensor, but then they develop a machine learning model to use that inaccurate data to predict more accurately the actual temperatures, and then use a few expensive sensors in the same locations, in a few of the same locations, to train the model. And they, the graph on the right shows the accuracy that they were able to achieve in doing this kind of learning. And so you can see here that this kind of project is combining hardware design, it's combining programming language work, it's combining sensor networks, and it's combining machine learning in order to solve a real world problem that real farmers face. And they have done many deployments like this in real farms in production settings of this kind of work, which I think is one of the most impressive aspects of the SmartFarm project. Okay, on the third project, and I'll just go through this relatively quickly. So the Microsoft FarmBeats work has an even broader range of work, and I won't have time to do justice to it at all. Neither did I for the SmartBeats, the SmartFarm work from UCSB. Broadly, the FarmBeats project is addressing the problem that for farmers to take advantage of precision agriculture services today, data-driven agriculture decision-making in farms, they have to be able to collect data, analyze it, and make decisions based on it in a way that is much lower cost than what they face today, and also in places where there are significant infrastructure limitations. And that's in some sense, the vision of the FarmBeats work. And um, they have addressed a number of different challenges. I'll just touch on a couple of them here today. One of them is farm connectivity. So rural internet services are quite spotty. In fact, in farmhouses, you might have very limited bandwidth connections back to the internet, but even that is often not quite robust. If you get to the actual fields where crops are grown, there's typically no internet at all, or there might be a few internet in a few fields and not in others. And so one of the technologies that this group has explored for a while is called TV white spaces. So in particular, the observation is that if you look at the spectrum of TV broadcasts in any area, there are gaps. So these are the gaps where if you tune a television over the air to this to a frequency in a gap, what you see is white noise, right? It's just a little speckled dots on the screen. There's no actual signal there. And those gaps can be used to carry data signals. Effectively, you're piggybacking on this TV spectrum, but you have to modulate your signal so you fit only within the gaps and don't interfere with commercial broadcasting channels. And so the technology itself involves how to frequency hop across this whole domain to maximize the transmission capability. And they can get 100 to a few hundred megabits per second in areas where there's relatively low television coverage, which is somewhat common in rural areas. And so that's the TV white space infrastructure. And in fact, Microsoft is now commercializing this. They have an initiative called Fair Airband, which is making rural internet service available in many areas, in many states. I think 22 states at this point have partnered with them to provide rural internet service using TV white space technology. So that's one part of the FarmBeats effort, and it's really driven by wireless networking research. So the person who leads this work, I should add, Ranveer Chandra, is a networking and systems researcher, and he's the chief scientist for Azure Global. A second major problem is that when you have large fields, which is commonplace in the developing world, it's very hard to have sensor deployments across these fields. So for example, if you want to measure some important property like soil moisture across a large field, it's essentially impossible, or at least extremely impractical, to deploy enough sensors across the field to measure soil moisture at enough density. And so what they have done in the FarmBeats work is to use drones to sense soil properties using panoramic views of a field, compare that, and then gather um, sensor data at sparse locations within the field by using actual soil moisture sensors at only a few locations, and then use that to train or infer the soil moisture from the drone video. And using that, develop precision maps of soil moisture. And in fact, they can also do this for soil pH. And both of these are at quite high levels of accuracy. So they basically take drone gathered data um, and then use that combined with a few sensor data from a few sensors to build these precision maps for both moisture and pH. And that's the kind of map you're seeing on the right here. They have deployed the FarmBeats infrastructure, which includes a sensor hub and optionally the TV white space technology, in a variety of farms, both small and large, in 3 different states. And this slide, I think, is old because I think this is actually expanded quite a bit now. And they support a wide range of different sensors and an IoT infrastructure called FarmBeats for FarmBeats data processing at the edge using the Azure IoT suite. So those are just some of the aspects of the 3 projects. There are a few takeaways I'll touch on here. I think there's a lot more that can be learned from these projects, but just to give you a sense of the kinds of results that they've been able to get. So in the HPVM work for compilers and optimization for edge computing, what we found, which is I think important here, is that heterogeneous parallel computing, um, typically SoCs, or at least something like a combination of a CPU and either a GPU or a machine learning accelerator, is important in ag systems because edge computing is important in a variety of applications like robotics and computer vision. But also important that approximate computing has very high potential to reduce costs and increase functionality. So we can really dramatically reduce the compute requirements and therefore the hardware requirements, but also increase the functionality of what these tasks, the tasks you can do. And by doing that, and also by combining this with machine learning at the edge, you can really very significantly improve outcomes for agriculture um, in these applications. And in the SmartFarm work, they have shown already that sensors, edge computing, and IoT can greatly improve ag results. Um, they have shown that field deployments or deployments in production fields are really important to be able to accurately understand what the right system designs are, um, and also that these system designs must be extremely robust to the elements. But they've also shown that a few expensive sensors can be used along with uh, simple machine learning techniques to enable very low cost sensing so that you can avoid the cost problem of deploying expensive sensors at scale, which farmers just are not able to do. And in the farm beats work, they are really showing or tackling the importance of bringing down both the cost and the complexity of data collection, which are absolutely key for enabling digital agriculture. Um, Almost any task in digital agriculture faces this problem. In particular, the the very deep lack of good broadband service in rural areas is a critical bottleneck for advancing agriculture. But they also, like the smart farm work, have shown that by combining a few expensive sensors with machine learning techniques, they can enable sensing at very large scales, which is a really promising outcome. But I should also point out that all of these projects and research areas are very much in their infancy. I think there are many unexplored challenges in all the different problem areas that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. And we really have a long way to go to apply computer science research to tackling some of the major problems facing agriculture. The good news is that the funding agencies very much recognize this. I won't spend too much time on this. I just have this one slide and then I'll wrap up. But NSF has a few programs that support this, in many cases with contribution from the USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, NIFA. So the Signals of the Soil program was developed explicitly by an ag person who came over to NSF, Jim Jones. And they have basically funded research on monitoring techniques for soils and soil health. The Cyber-Physical Systems program for robots and drones, the IIS division of SIZE for many different AI research directions, smart and connected communities for smart systems and IoT. And then there's even an engineering research center on IoT for ag today. Um, I'm almost done, Dave. I will wrap up in just a moment here. Sorry, I know I'm running over. And then in the USDA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture has a variety of programs. The AFRI Foundation of Applied Science especially has a number of research funding sources for AI in agriculture. And so AFRI is an institute of, and NIFA, um, the for agriculture and food research, and the Food and Agriculture Cyber-Informatics and Tools program, as well as the National AI Institutes program, funds the agriculture themes for the AI institutes. And then there are other agencies and foundations like ARPA-E, DOE, FFAR, and the Gates Foundation that also fund research in this area. Um, with that, I will stop, and I'm happy to take any questions people may have. I apologize for running over a little bit, but I'd be happy to take questions.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Vikram. No worries about running over. We have plenty of slack in the schedule. So thank you for the great talk. And it was really inspiring to hear about the opportunities we have as computer science researchers to really do something different and address lots of critical societal problems and have an impact in the real world. So that was great. So we'll go ahead and switch over to question and answers. You can post your questions in the Cloud or chat, and I'll be relaying them to Vikram. You can also join the room for the Zoom room for the talk. Raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll call on people there to try to moderate the people speaking all at once. So we have a first question from the Cloud or chat already. Isaac asks, Isaac says, thanks for the presentation. On programming languages, do you have some pointers to the state of the art on DSLs for non-experts?
That's a really good question. You know, it's an area that I want to work on, I want to look into. I don't I don't know the literature enough off the top of my head. I just have looked enough at current DSLs and the DSL literature that I believe that DSLs today even though they are called domain specific, they tend to be very technical.
Mhm.
And I don't personally know of any DSLs, for example, that could allow someone like, let's say, a crop scientist or a soil scientist or a livestock researcher to be able to write programs using concepts in their research domain, as opposed to writing programs in machine learning DSLs or Python or a variety of other frameworks like that, which to me seem like technical languages rather than truly domain specific languages. So if I think it's an opportunity, but I don't know the literature off the top of my head, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So one question I had: do you see, I remember being a graduate student and demoing, compiler techniques to somebody was never that exciting. Do you see more engagement from students because they're doing something that's so more, much more connected to the real world?
Yeah, I actually have already seen that. I've been contacted by quite a few students who are interested in working on digital agriculture related problems. Um, and some of that is, I think, also the AI hype that once that machine learning and AI attracts a lot of students these days.
Mhm.
And the fact that it can be applied in the agriculture space is, they are interested in doing the AI and they'll do it in for any problem domain. So
Mhm.
some of it is that, but some of it also is that people are interested in actually working on real world problems, as you said, and are really motivated by that. So I've also been contacted by people from the agriculture side who have started using technologies in their work and may not be computer scientists even, but maybe using computer science techniques quite extensively. So I've had people from all different areas contact me expressing interest.
Mhm. Great. See there. Anyone in the Zoom room have a question? I don't see any hands raised,
Yes.
but go ahead, Radesh.
Um, so Vikram, you talked about a use of approximate computing uh, to um, make hardware more accessible, so to speak, so that the same requirements could be met by cheaper hardware. What are your thoughts on programming abstractions that could enable the use of such methods at the software level?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So that's something that we're just starting to explore now in the Approx tuner and the HPVM work. The the right abstraction here is that application code. So typically what will happen is that a real application, the end application, will include a variety of different algorithms. Maybe it'll include some kind of image processing pipeline combined with some neural network model to process images or some other computational algorithms to work on the data. And for each of, and the application, at the application level, what we think is important is that you should only specify an application level end-to-end metric of the desired quality constraints. So rather than so today what most language or interface models in this kind of problem in approximate computing ask you to do are to specify more detailed metrics for compute or um, other kinds of information that are not end to end for an application and not at the level of the quality metrics of the application. So as an example for navigating with a robot, you may want to say something like, I don't want to deviate more than a few degrees off center as I'm going between the rows of corn, rather than saying something like, I want to get less than, I don't know, less than 3% reduction in accuracy or some other, or less than, or I want to be able to use at least 16-bit floating point, or I want to be able to control some other approximation parameter in the underlying computation. And so that application level metric needs to be then be translated down into the more detailed metrics of the individual algorithms and different parts of the application. And that's what we're trying to do in the ApproxTuner work, for example. But we're not there yet. I think even now, so far as I said, we've been in ApproxTuner looking at the individual algorithms. We are still, we now need to take the next step. And that's still better than what people have done in the past. But we now need to take the next step of actually going to even more application level metrics.
Thank you. Thank you. I see there are other questions.
Yep.
I will hold my follow-up.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Yeah. So in the chat, Julia asked, could you talk a bit about how you started collaboration with real farms?
Yeah, so first, I have not yet collaborated with real farms. One thing that may not have been clear, I give a lot of credit to, for example, Chandra Krins and Rich Wolski at UCSB, and also Ranveer Chandra and the Microsoft Farm Beats project. They have been doing this for longer than I personally have. They've been working with real farms, deploying their technologies on real farms. We are starting to do this in the AI farms research now. And over the next few years, I think we're going to be doing a lot more of that. But one of the most common or useful avenues to do that, at least for people who are at a land grant university in the US, and there might be other avenues in other countries, other similar avenues. But in the US land grant universities, there's always an extension unit, which is a very substantial part of the university. And the role of that unit is to interface with the agriculture community across the whole state that you represent. So for example, for us, our UFI extension has offices in every county in Illinois. They work closely with farmers. And through them in AI farms, we are going to be working directly with farmers to evaluate the technologies and deploy them. So actually try them out on farms. Another example is that the pig farm I mentioned where we visited, we are planning to do a camera deployment there and work with the data coming off that farm. And so that's another place where we will be working with farmers more directly.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Vikram. Yes, Hidresh, you want to ask another one of your follow-up questions?
Yeah. So my follow-up question was related to verifying how the approximation design decisions at the lower level could affect the system level constraints.
Right.
Could you
Yep.
could you comment on what sort of program checking techniques might be needed in the future for such cases?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it gets to the heart of what is difficult about this. Basically, the approach that we've taken two approaches so far. The first one is a brute force approach where essentially what we do is to statistically inject error. So again, the problem is that you're running some computation like an image processing pipeline or a neural network, and you have some end-to-end goal on the accuracy, but you want to tolerate approximations in individual parts of the computation, which cause errors in individual parts of the network. So for example, a neural network, it might cause an error in the outputs of a convolution layer or some other layer like that, or in an image processing pipeline or a single filter. So what we do in this more brute force approach is to empirically inject errors in each of the operations independently in that in the computation, and measure, explicitly run the whole algorithm and explicitly measure the end-to-end error. And by repeating that many times, we get a statistical estimate of the end-to-end error because of the individual application approximation effect. And so we're basically trying many different approximation choices and estimating their end-to-end impacts by directly measuring the effect on the error. But that's brute force, it's expensive, it really doesn't scale to very large applications. And so the second approach that we have been using more recently, which is what is about to appear in PPOP in our more recent paper on ApproxTuner is a predictive error approach where we basically have an analytical prediction of what the end-to-end error is. And we can use that to guide an auto-tuner to look at many different combinations of approximations without having to run the end-to-end application for each possible combination. So for each combination of approximations, we predict the end-to-end error analytically. And so we get 12 to 16 to 20 times faster experiments or auto-tuning times. And then we have to, so now what we've done is search through a large search space and identified some small number of good choices. In fact, what we specifically do is develop a Pareto optimal curve of performance versus accuracy, or energy versus accuracy, depending on your goal. And in that Pareto optimal curve, there's only a few points compared to the whole search space that you explored. So you might explore 10,000 points, but the Pareto optimal point may only have 10 points or 20 points. And now for those 10 or 20 points, we can actually empirically validate by explicitly measuring the end-to-end execution. And so we're using prediction during the search and then explicit measurement to validate the results.
Okay.
Thank you, Vikram, and thank you for answering several questions that you had.
Sure. Great. All right, thank you. And so we have another question from Subrana from University of Michigan. It says, thanks for the inspiring talk. Could you share your thoughts on the sustainability dimension? What are some of the challenges there? Some of the deployed systems that you presented involved feed or yield optimization and other monitoring. Does this directly correlate to some sustainability metrics?
Okay, that's a very big question. There's a lot of aspects and dimensions to that. Sustainability in some sense is one of the fundamental challenges in agriculture today. And in fact, the USDA recently put out a document for their strategic goals. And one of the 4 main strategic goals is what they call sustainable intensification, which is improving yields in a way that's highly sustainable without environmental impacts. And so, for example, in the AI farms research in particular, there are a variety of examples of this, including better nitrogen use efficiency to be able to, so this is the seed breeding for reducing nitrogen requirements and fertilizer requirements to reduce the environmental impact of fertilizers, soil monitoring to identify nutrient flows through soils and how much of that actually flows into waterways, mechanical weeding for avoiding the use of herbicides completely, precision farming, so a variety of both robot-based and also machine learning-based techniques to do much more precise use of chemicals like nutrients and like fertilizers and pesticides. All of these are ways in which we're really addressing some of the key sustainability problems in agriculture. There's also an interesting trade-off between labor and environmental impact for row crops. So in row crops today, at least in the developed world, there's not exactly a labor shortage because they're basically pretty already optimized to the maximum extent possible. In other words, they use very, very few people to grow plants on crops on enormous fields. But the way they do that is by using enormous equipment like $100,000 or $500,000 system like harvesters and combines and tractors. And the problem with that is that it requires doing exactly the same crop on very large areas. So that monoculture kind of strategy has serious environmental harm because of impact on the soil health and microbiome in the soil and many others. And so this is one example of where you could greatly improve the environmental outcome without reducing the number of people, but without requiring more people, by allowing farmers, the same number of farm managers to do sort of pretend that they're like, they have 10 times more people, but you're using robots to do a lot of the work that can be automated, supervised by the farm managers. And so there's a real opportunity there to use automation to augment the effectiveness of the farmers to achieve more sustainable outcomes.
All right, great, thank you.
And I don't know if I addressed your question. I probably addressed only a small fraction of it, but there are many dimensions to the question that you just asked.
All right, good. So there aren't any more questions in chat, but there are some more people who have joined the Zoom. So if anyone wants to go ahead and unmute themselves and ask a question, please go ahead. We're no longer streaming to YouTube, so it's just the 20 people here in the room.
Okay.
So does anyone have any additional questions for Vikram or any follow-ups?
One small question.
Yeah, sure.
So these robots and drones generate lots of data or sensors. Are there any efforts to open this data so that you can kind of see how this looks, or such farm data can be like used by let's say students who learn machine learning or come up with new algorithms to kind of predict certain phenomena in the farm?
Yeah, so I think you touched on a really important but unfortunately difficult problem, which is that farmers and also companies today are extremely reluctant, basically not willing to share data. And it varies for livestock and for crop farmers. There are a variety of different reasons why that's the case. But essentially, you cannot expect them to be sharing data with other farmers or in any way that can be accessible to other farmers. And so the data that gets developed on research, in research and academics and the USDA labs and other areas like that, these data sources can become public, and there is a lot of such data. For that kind of data, you could then use this for education, for training, for for research. The one additional challenge there is that the data is very non-uniform. It's not. It comes from different sensors that are just not compatible with each other. It's stored in different kinds of tools. It's stored in different formats, and accessing multiple different sources of data and processing it simultaneously is actually a major infrastructure and even a scientific problem.
But once you open the data, you will have a community taking care of that, kind of building derived data sets and kind of starting to create teaching material. So we have relevant problems in teaching, like predict the pH value from a drone image, for example.
Yeah, but that's this open source philosophy that I think we understand pretty well in the computer science world. The research, the domain application world, like crop scientists and animal scientists and others, are just coming to grips with this, right? So they have the data. In many cases, the data sits for 6 months in their hard disk on their computer, and the students come back to it months later or years later, and it's amazing how inefficient or slow it is to actually get a handle on that data. So it's not easy.
Good, but thank you.
Sure. But it's a really important problem. In fact, it's such an important problem, especially the data privacy issue, that the US Congress has had hearings on how systems could be put in place to make it easier for technology solutions to be developed that can access data from multiple farmers without exposing the data to each other. And so, for example, federated learning, that's one possible approach for this kind of problem, right? But there's other ones as well.
Okay, great. All right, so from the chat, Julia has a question. She says, in the context of agriculture, is it worth investing in verification of, for example, robots, or rather good enough, highly scalable, cheap solutions?
That's a good question. So I'll be honest, I have not found problems where safety is a high enough concern. Either safety or security is a high enough concern that verification is a primary bottleneck. Privacy is a different issue. So data privacy, for all the reasons I just said for the previous question, data privacy is a hugely important issue. But I think verification is far more important in other autonomous systems, like autonomous vehicles, for example. So when you're talking about vehicles that can operate in public roads and people's lives are at risk, verification becomes of paramount importance, right? It becomes one of the highest, most important criteria. In agriculture, it's less so. There's much less likelihood of harm. So for example, if a robot misbehaves or just takes a wrong turn or something, the worst you'll do is damage some plants. You're very unlikely to actually lead to injury or other problems. And so um, there is less of a priority put on verification, at least for now.
Yeah.
And there are many other bottlenecks in technology adoption and research that I think really need to be tackled before we get to a point where maybe verification would rise to the level of becoming a high priority.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a lot less risk of like a little crop robot doing damage than a car.
Yeah, exactly. And the very big equipment like the tractors and combines and harvesters, also, they can do tremendous damage, but then they basically operate in empty environments. There's nobody there, and they are actually autonomous. They're probably the earliest machines to become autonomous. They run entirely by themselves. So the farmer in the cab basically can sit there and read a novel or watch a movie. They don't actually do that, just to be clear. They have lots of things to monitor in the cab. They're actually looking at a lot of data coming off sensors and things and monitoring what the machine is doing. But they don't have to actually drive the thing. No. Or even tell it what to do. It's basically operating completely autonomously.
Okay, great. Any more questions from anyone in Zoom?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank him for like his great projects and things like LLVM. I had a previous experience with LLVM, and it's like a great compiler innovation we have now. And now looking more, you are doing some great projects, and I'm like really interested in working with in this agriculture field, and this talk was like very interesting to me. So hopefully I will try to get into this HPVM thing and just try to do some collaboration, and I'll try to be part of it. Thank you so much for all your work.
Yeah, no, that's great, Ritik. Yeah, we'd welcome that. HPVM is open source, and ApproxTuner is going to be open source sometime soon also. So we'd welcome any interest. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Get in touch if you like.
Yeah, sure, I will. Yeah,
and
thank you so much.
Sure. And on that same note, any other students in the audience, I think if you're interested in any of the computer science research areas that I talked about today, I think you'll find very interesting applications of that research in digital agriculture. And you'll find quite interesting challenges to solve within the computer science field for digital agriculture.
All right.
And Vikram, on behalf of the conference organization, I wanted to thank you very much for taking this opportunity to give this talk.
Sure.
We will probably see you again in
Yes.
in 12 hours.
Absolutely.
But that will just be for Q&A.
Yep.
The talk will be played. And that session works a little differently because we don't really see the talk in the Zoom session. The talk is just on the conference platform on YouTube. So if you are interested in, you already have a conference platform account, so feel free to activate it or join us there. Or you can also watch it on the conference website. Either way works.
Got it. Okay. And then for the Q&A after that, I would join the Zoom link, right?
Yep.
Okay. And when should I join that? Should I join at the beginning of the talk, end of the talk, partway through? What is best?
I will let the session chair decide that.
Okay.
You can join, as long as you're in the Zoom by partway through, that's fine. I mean, I'm probably going to Zoom at the beginning, and then the trick is you disconnect from the Zoom audio, and you listen to the YouTube audio if you want to hear yourself talk, which I personally find kind of tough, but
I know. But it's something you don't usually get to do, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know. So, oh my God, that was terrible.
All right. Okay, great.
Thanks very much.
Thank you both very much. I really appreciate you hosting the talk and inviting me to give this talk. I really
Yep.
enjoyed it.
All right, so see you
Okay.
in 11 hours or something.
See you in 11 hours. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Radesh. Thank you, everyone else, for staying. Bye-bye.